So let's get started. I'd like to just take a second to introduce our guest presenter, Diane DiBasella. Diane is joining us from Fractured Atlas, and give you a little bit of background on her. She actually started as the administrative assistant almost 5 years ago, and within months she was promoted to program associate and began helping to support and grow the fiscal sponsorship program. Since March of 2008, Diane has served as Fractured Atlas's program director for fiscal sponsorship, and Diane helps over 1,200 sponsored artists and emerging organizations, and representing all artistic disciplines, find funding and other resources to support their work. She received her BFA in photography from Massachusetts College of Art and is an alumna of the Woodhull Institute. She completed her Master's of Professional Studies with distinction from Pratt Institute's Arts and Cultural Management program, and she's previously worked as a project coordinator for a restoration painting studio and as a manager of site development for Planet Aid. She enjoys growing vegetables, cooking them, and taking pictures of them, and composting the scraps, of course, and we're pleased to have her join us today and present her session on fiscal sponsorship for artists and arts organizations. Everything you need to know. Take it away, Diane.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining the webinar. I'd like to apologize. There was just a buzzing noise, and my doorbell just rang, but I'm going to ignore it, so hopefully we won't be interrupted by that. And thank you to the Foundation Center and Sarah Jo and Carolyn for organizing this. I'm really excited to be on the call and to share information about fiscal sponsorship with all of you. So to get started, what we're going to cover tonight is talking a little bit about the pros and cons of fiscal sponsorship. We're going to look sort of in depth at what fiscal sponsorship is and how it can be beneficial to you. We're also going to look on the other side of the spectrum at 501c3 status and sort of what it is, how it works, and whether or not that might be something that, as an alternative to fiscal sponsorship or vice versa, that it would be work out for you guys. We're also going to Okay, sorry about that. So we are also going to talk about how to determine whether or not a fiscal sponsor is right for you and what to look for with that agreement. But before I begin, I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about Fractured Atlas and our staff. Fractured Atlas is a nonprofit arts service organization. We are a national organization and we are member-based. So what this means is, we have all different types of programs and services that are available to people who are members of Fractured Atlas. Our mission is to help artists and arts organizations with the business side of their work. So our programs and services sort of center around, what are the back-end services that an individual artist or an arts organization need in order to thrive and survive. Our programs include, we have a low-cost insurance program. The insurance program includes low-cost liability insurance. So, that's anything ranging from, I apologize again, anything ranging from a liability insurance quote for any sort of rental that you might need, or a rental space that you might need, or if you are, forming a board of directors and you need to get officers insurance. We also offer, direct rates to all of these insurance plans, and they're some of the lowest rates in the country. So we have these rates available to all of our members because of the relationships that we have with the insurance companies. So, if you have any need for any sort of liability insurance policies, you should check us out. We also provide education and advocacy for health insurance, and this is something that is, directed at mainly helping people to sort of navigate the health insurance industry and determine what they need and how they can access it. We unfortunately do not have any direct access to plans, but we can help direct you to places where you can purchase plans directly. We have a variety of different technology programs that I'm not going to go into too much detail about, but they include a ticketing software and a space finding software. So if you're interested in learning more about those, definitely check out our website. And lastly, we have a fiscal sponsorship program, which is one of the largest fiscal sponsorship programs for the arts in the United States. We have over 2,500 fiscally sponsored projects, and they range in discipline and size and sort of scope of what they're doing. So if you're interested in learning more about our specific projects, we also have a lot of information on our website about them. As Sarah Jo mentioned, I've been working at Fractured Atlas for the last 5 years, And my focus has really been on helping our projects to raise as much money as they can for the creation of their work. We are extremely focused on the sort of customer service aspect of our fiscal sponsorship program. So that's, as quickly as we can and as effectively as we can, assisting with any questions that you have. And while, we might not always be able to answer them, we try to point you into the direction where you can find an answer if we are unable to. I just wanted to point out my colleague next to me in the photos. I am in the top left corner, and my colleague next to me, Juliana Steele, is the program specialist for fiscal sponsorship, and she also helps me to run the program and develop it and sort of guide it through all of the, the growth and the changes that we have in it. So to get started, I thought, providing a little bit of context about what 501c3 status actually is would be helpful in terms of actually understanding what fiscal sponsorship is. So 501c3 status is something that only the IRS can grant to an organization. And it's something that you have to apply for. So, there's a process where you would submit something called the Form 1023 to the IRS in order to apply. Once that's approved by the IRS, basically the organization is exempt from paying federal income tax. Also, all of the donations that are made to your organization are typically tax deductible for that individual that's making them. Also, it sort of opens the doors to apply to any sort of federal or foundation support. So any sort of grants that are out there, it gives you access to those. I like to just point out to people that the terms nonprofit and tax exempt don't necessarily mean the same thing. The reason that this is because there are various steps along the way to becoming a 501c3 organization, and one of them is applying to your state attorney general's office for nonprofit incorporation. The nonprofit incorporation is not the same thing as receiving 501c3 tax exemption from the IRS. The nonprofit incorporation is on a state level, and so typically, the major benefit of becoming a nonprofit corporation in your state is that you don't have to pay sales tax if that is something applicable in your state. Once you become a nonprofit incorporation in your state, you can then submit the Form 1023 to the IRS to become a nonprofit, tax-exempt 501c3 charitable organization. So I just like to clarify that because sometimes, people will use the term nonprofit and they use it quite loosely, and it might mean that they are just, operating with some sort of charitable purpose, even though they don't have any sort of official formalization to their organization, or they could be a nonprofit corporation in their state, or they could be trying to say that they're a nonprofit tax-exempt 501c3 organization. So just be aware of that in that type of conversation when things about 501c3 status come up. Fiscal sponsorship is something that has been in existence for the United States for over 35 years. And it's something that sort of grew out of this need of organizations that weren't quite ready to become their own 501c3 organization. What it is it's a legal agreement between either an individual or some sort of group or organization and an IRS-approved 501c3 organization. And what that agreement does is it enables that either individual or group or organization to use some of the benefits of the 501c3's tax-exempt status. It's something that, it doesn't exist in the IRS tax code. It's sort of a gray area of the tax code, and it's been interpreted and sort of laid out officially by the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors over the last decade or so. The way that it works is that if a project is interested in getting any sort of funds from, a private foundation, a government agency, any sort of individuals or corporate donors, is that it gives you access to that money so that, you can still obtain it as a fiscally sponsored project without having to go through the process of becoming your own 501c3. The fiscal sponsor, the 501c3 organization, acting as your sponsor, will receive the funds for the purposes of your work and then give them to the project to use for specific expenses related to the project. So I'm using the term project, and that is sort of defining anybody that qualifies sort of as that individual, informal group or organization that's looking for a fiscal sponsor. There are a lot of different models of fiscal sponsorship, and it's something to be aware of if you're thinking about entering into a fiscal sponsorship relationship, is to find out more details about what that relationship entails. Generally, the project has to fall within the organizational mission of the sponsor, and it has to be charitable in nature. And it's something really, if you're thinking about entering into, that you want to examine closely exactly how that fiscal sponsor is operating their program. So if you're considering becoming your own 501c3, there are a number of things that are really positive about having your own 501c3 status. First off, I would say that the sort of filing and documents and preparation that you have to go through to submit the Form 1023 is really something that will cause your group to be clear about the mission of the organization and to help set up operational rules and procedures that will help facilitate all future decision making. It also, instituting that board of directors, and that board of directors is going to be accountable for all of the work your organization produces, can really inspire confidence in your donors, your grantors, and your audiences. So that's just a good thing to keep in mind. Once you become a 501c3 tax-exempt organization, your organization will be exempt from federal income tax, from federal unemployment tax, and from most state taxes. And this varies from state to state, so I can't speak specifically to each state about that. It can be a tedious task to go through the application process, but once you do that, you'll be able to apply for any government or foundation grant that you can find and that you're eligible and meet their criteria. Your donors will obviously appreciate the tax deduction that you are able to offer all of them, and it will provide a credibility boost in all realms and all places that you're operating. There are also some minor perks that come along with having a 501c3 status, and that could include anything from access to bulk mailing rates from the United States Postal Office to discounted rates from vendors. You could access services online, such as Network for Good, which is a charitable donation processing website that can process your online credit card donations. You can use Facebook Causes and all sorts of online donation processing things that are only available to 501c3s. There's also affinity programs out there that do things like give you a percentage of the sale whenever a purchaser mentions your name. So like Barnes & Noble offers that to 501c3s. So those are sort of all of the lovely things about having your own 501c3 tax exemption. On the flip side, there's a lot of things that you have to keep in mind in terms of paperwork. It's sort of endless, and it's something that you should be incredibly aware of before you go into it. The application process can take anywhere from 6 months to a year or even longer. We had a fiscally sponsored project that applied for 501c3 status and that came back to us over a year and a half after they submitted the Form 1023, saying that the IRS had been repeatedly asking them questions about their application. And when I started talking to them about it, it came out that they did not hire a lawyer and they did not hire an accountant to help them file the paperwork. So that is a huge thing that I would recommend. If you are thinking about submitting this to the IRS and becoming a 501c3, you need accountants and attorneys to make sure that you're doing it properly. The filing fee for becoming a 501c3 is anywhere from $350 and up. There's new filing fees that have been instituted in the last year or two. So I believe that they're in the $750 to $850 range at this point. And keep in mind that that filing fee doesn't include any sort of accounting or legal fees you're going to need to pay. And those can be upward as 10 times as much as that. Unfortunately, once you actually receive that IRS determination letter of your 501c3 status, the red tape doesn't really end there. You're not in the clear and you can do whatever you want. In fact, it's really just the beginning of the sort of paperwork that's going to be endless in the operation of your 501c3. At the conclusion of each of your fiscal years, you'll need to file Form 990 with the IRS, which is the standard tax form that is filed for all 501c3 tax-exempt organizations. You'll be required to file annual reports with your state Secretary of State and the Attorney General's office. You'll be required to hold annual board meetings and quarterly. You have to keep official minutes. And this is something to really keep in mind is you are going to have to work closely with that board of directors, so they better be people that you would like to work with on a regular basis. You'll have to institute an accounting system and keep your books in accordance with nonprofit accounting standards. Most institutional funders will require that you have an annual audit with your financial statements being audited by an accountant. This can take an enormous amount of time, and for small organizations can cost $5,000 or more per year. There are also rules for how to solicit contributions and how to acknowledge them and how to record them. So this is something that you do need to know how to do. And lastly, you need to know that corporations are designed to exist in perpetuity. So once you form that 501c3 and you have your board of directors, you have to keep in mind that this is not something that you're supposed to close in 2 years because it didn't work out. It's something that's going to be ongoing, and that at any point your board of directors could say, it's not working out, we want to hire a new executive director. So, you do not retain ownership over the work unless you have special clauses with and contracts with the 501c3 that specifically states you will own all of the work that is produced. So, make sure that you're thinking about it before you enter into it and that you speak to legal advisors. And then there's the fun stuff, the fiscal sponsorship. Of course, obviously, it's my favorite, so I can say that. But so with fiscal sponsorship, there are a lot of benefits that come into it. Instead of all of that paperwork and the balancing of the books and filing reports, you can focus your time on creating stuff. You have access to many of the benefits of the 501c3 status without having to go through all of that sort of administrative back end that is required to operate as a 501c3. Applying through a reputable fiscal sponsor can lend your project credibility. So since the funder will typically be familiar with that sponsor if they're operating a program that has a lot of projects and they're comfortable applying for grants as a fiscal sponsor, it'll make it so it elevates your status in that application chain because the funder will be familiar and be comfortable with giving money to that fiscal sponsor. It also means that any funds coming from individuals and corporations that you'd like to receive can come to your fiscal sponsor, and they can release those to you for expenses related to your work. It can provide you with a built-in support staff, so a sponsor can do things such as navigating the fundraising world for you, to carrying some of the administrative burden. They can help you get organized and think long-term about, sort of what are the plans that you need in order to operate either your organization or your individual artistic career, or, your group of people that are working together informally. We also provide such extra services such as networking and accounting services, bookkeeping, consulting, human resources management, employee benefits, shared office space, legal advice, management training, and every fiscal sponsor is different. So I'm sort of reading down the list of all of the different services that could potentially be offered by a fiscal sponsor, but those are some of the kinds of questions you would want to ask. What sort of services do you provide in addition to administering our donations and our grants? It eliminates all of the legal and filing fees that go along with the 501c3 status, and it can make particular sense for short-term projects that don't need to be in perpetual existence. It's important to remember that. If you don't know if it's something that you're going to want to live forever, then it might not be something that's necessary for 501c3. It can also be a great place to start. Fiscal sponsorship can be a great place to start if you're not sure if you want to go the 501c3 route. On the other hand, there are also, the downside to fiscal sponsorship is that the fiscal sponsor is going to have to exercise control and oversight on how your funds are raised and how they are spent. So for some people, this can be a huge headache. At Fractured Atlas, we require that all of our projects show us all of the materials that they are using for any fundraising purposes. So whether or not that's an individual appeal letter or a grant application or an LOI, we want to see it before it goes out to that potential donor or funder. So this is something that's standard across the fiscal sponsorship sector, is that we need to know about your fundraising practices, because we need to make sure that since you're fundraising for our 501c3 status, that you're doing that in accordance with the charitable laws that govern the state and the federal exemption. So, fiscal sponsorship doesn't mean that you can just take the money and run. Fiscal sponsorship is not a pass-through. We don't just take the money and give it to you without asking you what you're going to be doing with it. Each sponsor is different, like I said, but the standard practice for most sponsors is to ask you, once you raise your money, what you're going to be spending the money on. And that obviously will require some sort of record keeping on your part. It also will require for you to be able to be active and in communication with the sponsor. There is periodic reporting requirements from sponsors, so you may need to do, some have quarterly, some have biannually, some have annually, but typically they'll ask you to report back on the activities of the work that you are producing. The agreement that you'll have with your sponsor is between, either that individual or informal group or organization and the sponsor. If you don't have a written agreement, you should find a different fiscal sponsor. You really want to have something spelled out in a contract that sets forth what the relationship is going to be. Make sure you review that and understand what you're entering into. The only other two cons of fiscal sponsorship that I want to mention are, potential funding conflicts between you and the sponsor. And this is something that for Fractured Atlas, it's typically not an issue because we are an art service organization and we're not producing art. So we typically don't have conflicts where we want to apply to a funder that one of our projects would like to apply to. That being said, though, there are fiscal sponsors that are producing organizations that have, presenting spaces and things like that, that could potentially be applying to the same funder as you would like to apply to, and who could say to you, I'm sorry, you can't apply because it could jeopardize our application, or the funder only allows one application per year, or things like that. So you want to check that out at the beginning, find out if there are going to be conflicts and how that sponsor handles it. All fiscal sponsors charge fees for their services, and those fees can range from anywhere from 4 to 10%. And the reason that there's such a wide range of fees is that there are a wide range of services that go along with those fees. So somebody, for example, that's on the lower end of that fee range may not be offering anything extra. They might just say, we'll receive your donations, we'll work with you on your grant applications and take that money, but that's all we do. We don't offer any sort of professional development. We don't provide feedback on the work that you're producing in terms of the fundraising materials. They don't have any sort of back-end software that enables you to do your accounting easier or stuff like that. So you want to figure out what am I getting for this fee. If you're on the 10% end of the range, that's something also to ask. What are you doing extra? What's above and beyond that this costs so much more? So, there's a wide range in there. You also want to ask at the time that you're finding out about fees for a fiscal sponsor if there are additional fees. So are there some sort of hidden costs that you're not aware of? So for example, some fiscal sponsors charge their regular administrative fee, and then on top of that, they pass along to you the fees for credit card processing. So if you're receiving credit card donations through their fiscal sponsorship program, you'll be charged their merchant account fees on top of their administrative fee. So just make sure to ask and to find out if it's something that is going to be an issue. When you're thinking about whether or not fiscal sponsorship is right for you, my first recommendation would just be to talk to other people who have used fiscal sponsorship. Find out, what the relationship is like, how it works between them and their sponsor, and what are some of the perks and the negatives to it that project actually, can speak to. Make a list of what is important to you. So what are you looking for? What do you really want out of the relationship? Do you just want that, sort of basic donation processing and grant help? Or are you looking for something more robust where, you can have one-on-one meetings with the sponsor to talk about your strategic plans? Make sure that you talk with your attorney, your accountant, if you have staff members, and anybody else who's going to be involved. I highly recommend, if you're thinking about working with a fiscal sponsor, that you call them and have a conversation with them about what they're doing. They should be able to answer all of your questions, quickly and helpfully. So it's something that it'll give you a good sense of if they're somebody that you want to work with. If you do decide to go the fiscal sponsorship route, check out the San Francisco Study Center. There's a link on the bottom of this slide to their directory of fiscal sponsors. It can help you find one that's a good match for you, and it is shown by state and by discipline. So you can look up arts sponsors in your state. Keep in mind that the directory does have also national fiscal sponsors. So, Fractured Atlas is a national fiscal sponsor. We sponsor projects across the country regardless of their geographic location. NYFA, New York Foundations for the Arts, is also a national fiscal sponsor. So there are a handful of national fiscal sponsors out there. You'll need to make sure that if that's what you're looking for, that you can work with them. You can also look for local fiscal sponsors. Once you've sort of shopped around and thought about who you'd potentially like to work with, these are the sort of questions that you want to come prepared to talk to the sponsor about. So, is there a contract? What is in that contract, and can you look at it before you submit an application to the sponsor? How is the relationship going to work between you two? So is it something that, every time you receive a donation that, you need to contact them and discuss it with them? Or is it the type of thing that, the donations can be processed online through a credit card processing system and it's quite simple? Are you going to be able to access, the funds online? So could you, log into the website and release funds immediately, or do you have to submit paperwork? What is required at the time that you're asking for that fund release? Think about, in terms of how many projects they have, how accessible their staff is, and what really you're looking for in that relationship. Ask about the fees. Is it that 4%? Is that 10%? What's the difference between those? What level of involvement do you want them to have? So this is pretty important. Do you want them to be, involved in a way that they are almost like a project manager on your project and that they have, their hands in it? Or do you want them to be a little more arm's length and available when you need them, but not, checking in all the time and working more closely than you prefer? Like I said, contact one of their projects. Ask that project what it's like to work with them. Find out what the reporting requirements are. Each fiscal sponsor's reporting requirements are different, so you want to make sure that it's not something that's going to be too much for you to handle, or that's going to be detrimental to you actually being able to focus on your work. Find out whether or not the program that you're thinking about going into is exclusive. So, there are some fiscal sponsors that do not mind if you have multiple fiscal sponsors, and there are others that say, no, you can only be fiscally sponsored by us. So, this is something to keep in mind if you're going to work with a national fiscal sponsor, so such as Fractured Atlas. We are not exclusive. We allow you to have another fiscal sponsor. And typically, the reason that somebody would want a second fiscal sponsor is if they are applying for a local grant in their area that requires a fiscal sponsor from their area. So somebody might decide, well, I like Fractured Atlas for X, Y, and Z, but what I really want is to apply for this grant that they'll only give to a fiscal sponsor in my city, and Fractured Atlas is not in my city, so I need a fiscal sponsor one time for this grant. And, I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to go back and use the services that I like at Fractured Atlas. So, something to keep in mind. I always ask if that's going to be possible if you're working with somebody. Find out how the funds are managed. So, what sort of things does the fiscal sponsor have in place to make sure that these funds are protected and that they are clearly accounted for in terms of your project. Who are the staff members involved? What are the accounting procedures that that organization has in place? Talk to them about their fundraising procedures and sort of what they'll require from you. Are they going to ask you to review every single solicitation letter? Or, is it something that they have a more flexible system where you get to submit things later? Ask them if they accept online donations and if there's additional fees. Find out if they accept non-cash donations. So, that's any sort of donations of items. If somebody wants to donate a piano to your project, will the fiscal sponsor be able to issue a tax receipt for that piano? Do they accept donations of stock? So if you have, somebody who wants to donate stock to your project, will your fiscal sponsor be able to accept that and issue a tax receipt to them? How often do they give you the funds? So, do they release funds to you every day? Do they only do it weekly? Do they only do it biweekly? It's something important to know so that you know how frequently you'll be able to get access to the money that you raised. And what do they require you to do to release those funds? So, is it that a letter that you have to mail in? Do you have to go into their office to pick up the check? Can they directly deposit the money into your bank account? Do they write checks to other vendors that you're paying out of your fund? So they're sort of the important questions to think about. So there's some additional resources that I just wanted to point out, which looks like we'll have, after I finish this, about 20 minutes for questions. But I just want to mention the Foundation Center, the second link there, has a great tutorial about fiscal sponsorship on their website. Fiscal Sponsor Directory is the directory that I mentioned earlier. The Tide Center runs the National Network of Fiscal Sponsors. And this is sort of an informal organization of fiscal sponsors across the country and across sectors. So it's representative not only of the arts, but also of educational organizations, health organizations, social justice organizations, you name it, they provide fiscal sponsorship. So we work together to talk about the sort of best practices in fiscal sponsorship, how we can make it more accessible to people, how we can make it so funders are educated about the practice of fiscal sponsorship, and people can actually figure out ways to use it effectively to raise money for their charitable projects. The third to the last is the IRS section of the website that goes over the life cycle of a charity. The second to the last is a microsite of the IRS. It's called Stay Exempt. And what it does is it's specifically for 501c3 organizations. So whether or not you're new to the world of tax-exempt organizations, or you're completely familiar with them and you've been working with them for years, it's something that it guides you through these sort of tutorials, go at your own pace, of keeping your tax-exempt status and being aware of the sort of laws and requirements of being a 501c3. And lastly, the last website is the Fiscal Sponsorship website that is hosted by a lawyer named Greg Colvin. Greg Colvin has written a book on fiscal sponsorship that's sort of been a guiding force in the fiscal sponsorship sector on best legal practices. And there's a ton of great information on his website if you're interested in either starting up your own fiscal sponsorship program, or you just want to learn more in depth about what potentially you're entering into as a potential fiscally sponsored project. So, just to say it again, 501c3 status is definitely something that can be a really great thing for a lot of organizations, but just make sure you're ready before you dive in. You don't want to get your head too deep in something without realizing what the sort of challenges and opportunities are going to be. Fiscal sponsorship is a really great alternative to 501c3 status, and there's no right or wrong time to get fiscal sponsorship. If you're interested in it, if you think it might be right for you at the time, start up that conversation and find out if it's something that's going to work for you. If you have any questions and you want to talk about this presentation, or you want to learn more specifically about Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship program, please don't hesitate to email us at support@fracturedatlas.org. So Thanks so much, everybody. And I just clicking over to see if there's been any questions.
There are. I'm happy to read those for you. And thank you, Diane, for all this great advice and information on fiscal sponsorship. Your tips and resources that you're shared are fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and read some questions. Is that the last slide, or?
It is the last slide, yes.
Great. So Alice's question is asking, are individual donors' donations tax deductible if received through a fiscal sponsor?
Yes, they are. And this is something that a 501c3 can issue tax receipts for individual donors to fiscally sponsored projects. But, it's up to each individual donor's specific tax situation to determine whether or not that donation is tax deductible. So, based on their income, based on how much they've given to other public charities, based on a number of different factors, will determine how much of a deduction they can actually take. But as a fiscally sponsored project, your donors can receive that tax receipt stating that it's eligible for that tax deduction. So I hope that makes sense.
And so, and Alice, if that you need further clarification, again, please just enter your questions into the Q&A chat box. So we definitely have enough time for all of your questions. So feel free to enter them in the Q&A box. Our next question is from Melissa. Do you have to pay the fees on in-kind gifts?
It depends on the sponsor. At Fractured Atlas, we do charge an administrative fee for any non-cash gifts that are received, but each sponsor is different, so that's something you'd have to ask that specific sponsor.
Okay. And Tim is asking if you can repeat the name of the San Francisco-based organization that you mentioned just prior to the fiscal sponsor directory.
Sure. It's the San Francisco Study Foundation, and they host the Fiscal Sponsor Directory website. So if you go to Fiscal Sponsor Directory, you can find out more information about the San Francisco Study Center.
That's right. And I think they also helped publish that book.
They did, yes.
Yes, by Gregory Colvin.
Yes.
And they're also a fiscal sponsor. Maybe you mentioned that too. I'm pretty sure they are. Okay.
Yes, they are.
Fantastic. So Rob's question is, how specific does your project have to be when working with a fiscal sponsor? We're a theater company looking to establish a permanent space, expand our teaching and outreach, and produce performances. Can we raise funds based on an overall mission statement through a fiscal sponsor?
Absolutely. It's actually, a fiscal sponsor always wants to see that you have a project in mind, and that project can be, it can be a one-time event that you want to just get sponsored for. Let's say you're producing Hamlet, and you just want to get sponsored for that production of Hamlet. That's okay. If it's an individual artist that is thinking about becoming fiscally sponsored, they need to have an ongoing project in mind or a one-time project in mind. So they couldn't just get sponsored for, the individual artist to support their living expenses and their, food and health insurance and stuff like that. But if they have, ongoing work that they're producing, they can get sponsored for that body of work. If it's an organization that's a little more formalized and, sort of producing a lot of different things, running a space, having, multiple projects going on all the time, their fiscally sponsored project can be the theater company itself. So, you would write a mission statement just like somebody applying to the IRS for 501c3 status. And, that mission would be everything that's covered under the fiscal sponsorship agreement.
Great question. And I'm going to just pause here for a second as more great questions are coming in and just bring up our last slide, which is also asking you to give us your feedback on this program. We really want to make sure we're bringing you the best, and so you can help us do that by just filling out a quick survey by clicking on that link on the slide. That should be live for you, or I'll click on it for you and open it up for you. So it just literally will take you 30 seconds or so we appreciate that. Our next question is from Melissa. Are contracts monthly?
So again, that depends on the sponsor. Each sponsor has, a different sort of duration for the fiscal sponsorship agreements that they enter into with the projects. Some have, typically it's usually an annual agreement, but other sponsors have, a different agreement. Like ours is ongoing. As long as you're a member of Fractured Atlas and you've, adhered to our reporting requirements, you can stay sponsored indefinitely. The contract does not end.
Great. And I think we have another question here from Rena, and I think that you answered it already. Does a fiscal sponsorship require an actual project, or can an individual be fiscally sponsored?
Yeah, I think I clarified that. So if anybody has further questions about that, feel free to type them in.
That sounds good. Excellent. And then Connie's asking, how do contract dates work, say in the case of a film where the story continues for a while?
So again, it depends on the sponsor. I'm not sure if you're referring to the fiscal sponsorship contract or to, potentially an agreement that you might have with a funder, but each case is unique, and sponsors at the time that they are accepting a project into the fiscal sponsorship program will outline the parameters of that agreement at that time. Most, like I said, do have some sort of terms, whether or not that's something where you have to renew each year, where others, like Fractured Atlas, are sort of open-ended as long as you've remained in compliance with their program policies.
Great. Thank you. And Carrie's asking, how far in advance does a fiscal sponsor need a grant application before the application due date?
That's a great question. I keep saying it over and over. Every sponsor is different, but I'll just talk about the Fractured Atlas program to answer this question. We ask for 10 business days to review all grant materials before they go to a funder. So, that's 10 business days out from their deadline. And, I know there are other sponsors that have similar policies, and they might range from, 5 to 15 days, but it's something that you do want to check in on to make sure that it's going to be, not prohibitive for you to be applying for grants if you have to send them stuff too far in advance. Others may not have any sort of policy on that. They may be willing to, turn it around within one day, but we do ask for 10 business days, and if our projects are unable to do that, we reserve the right to charge a $75 rush fee for any grants that are submitted to us with less than 10 business days. And we, of course, try to be flexible about that, but there are times when we have, 30 projects applying to grants in 1 week, and it's sort of insane at our office, and we're trying to provide feedback to everybody. So it's sort of a best practice, though, to be ahead of the game. Funders really like, to have applications that are submitted early. So it can be helpful in that respect. And also, especially with online grant applications, you never want to wait till the last minute to be submitting those, because there's often issues where everybody's trying to submit the application, and their server can't handle the volume, and it crashes, and nobody can submit their applications. So, always good to be ahead of the game in terms of grant proposals and application deadlines.
Great advice. I can't echo that enough. Does the situation ever come up where a company, let's see, sorry, I can't read the try-in here, where a company will fiscally sponsor an entire nonprofit or a program within an established nonprofit? And this is a question from Justin.
So I guess I need clarification on that question, because I'm not sure if you're asking if that's for a program within a nonprofit corporation or another 501c3 that's, looking to get, I'm assuming that it's, I'm sorry, I'm not sure how to answer the question, because I need a little clarification on it.
Sure. So Justin, if you could just give us a follow-up explanation, that would be great, and then we'll just come back to that. Let's see. Alice wants to know where she can get more information on the rules for soliciting, reporting, and acknowledging contributions.
This is something that each 501c3 organization, there's not, you can read different parts of the IRS tax code, of the 501c3 status tax code, to find out more information about the rules governing that. But to be very frank, I would recommend having a legal advisor help with that, because it's something that you want to make sure you're doing it properly. And if you've ever read the IRS tax code, it is not a piece of cake to sort of read and understand every single piece of information. And also the way that it's laid out, while there'll be, sort of different publications from the 501c3 section of the tax code, sometimes you don't realize that while you think you're reading one topic and you're covering all of the information, there's another publication out there that sort of talks about a similar scope of topic, but that might be, a whole other thing that you need to be aware of. So I would definitely suggest contacting a legal advisor who's a professional in the nonprofit world who can help you sort of navigate that and set that up correctly.
I couldn't agree with you more. Do fiscal sponsors release examples of their current projects so that an individual could get a better idea of whether the fiscal sponsor is a good fit?
Absolutely. A lot of fiscal sponsors have their projects on their own websites. So, Fractured Atlas, for example, we have online profiles for every single one of our projects where you can, read about the work they're doing. The projects can have images or online campaigns run on our website for their fundraising efforts. And a number of other fiscal sponsors have similar sort of access to who is sponsored on their site. And it ranges from, it just being a list of all of the sponsored projects to being a little bit more detailed information about what the project's activities are and how to donate.
Great. Another question, to what degree does Fractured Atlas advise and or actually apply for foundation government grants and or administer campaigns targeting individual donors?
So we don't do any fundraising for our projects. All of the fundraising has to be done by the project itself. And that's sort of standard for all fiscal sponsors. It's pretty rare to come across a fiscal sponsor who's going to help actually write the grant proposals for you or match you up with funders. Now that being said, we do work closely with you once you submit that grant application to us for review to give you feedback on it. So we don't edit it and we won't write it for you, but what we will do is let you know that we found some grammatical errors or some spelling errors, that we don't think that you answered the questions that the funder is asking, that you might want to, either pare it down or to provide more details. So we want your application to be as strong as possible, and our name is going to be on it, so we want to make sure that it's appropriate and that it's, reflecting the information that the funder is requesting. We don't match you up with funders, so that's up to you to find the funders. And also as far as the second part of the question is how do we help with online campaigns? Is that correct?
That's the next question.
Right.
Is there any way to make donations through online platforms like Kickstarter tax deductible?
Yes. We at Fractured Atlas have an online campaign section of our website where you can either on our website create an online fundraising campaign where you can upload a picture and a video, you can set a deadline, you can set a goal, you can set different giving levels, and it's on the Fractured Atlas website, and you can do it at your own pace. It's the standard 6% administrative fee for all donations that come in through that. We also have partnerships with 2 different crowdfunding platforms. One of them is Indiegogo. Indiegogo is a partner of Fractured Atlas, so if you wanted your donors to be able to receive tax-deductible donations, you could set up an online campaign on the Indiegogo website. The donations would come directly to Fractured Atlas, and we still only charge the standard 6%, and there's no additional fees by Indiegogo. We have the same relationship with Rocket Hub, another crowdfunding platform. So same sort of setup. You can go on their website as a fiscally sponsored project, give your donors tax deductions on their contributions, and it's the 6% Fractured Atlas administrative fee, nothing additional from Rocket Hub.
That is very helpful. And I'm getting a lot of thanks and thank you. So
people are signing off.
Yeah, or just know that people are really appreciative of your answers and your expertise in this field. And to get back to circle back to Justin's question, he was referring to that it would be a program within an established 501c3 org.
Okay. I don't see any specific reason that a program within a 501c3 would need fiscal sponsorship. Since they, have their own 501c3 tax exemption, they should be able to operate and provide all of that sort of back-end support and donation processing and grant processing on their end. Now, that being said, there are cases where If somebody's just looking for sort of those extra services above and beyond the donation processing and the grant review stuff, then there are situations where some sponsors will sponsor, a program specifically to provide, sort of bookkeeping services, HR services, sort of more technical services that are necessary. Fractured Atlas doesn't have that kind of in-depth type of service. We don't provide HR or bookkeeping or anything like that. We do provide more of the professional development and guidance on fundraising that goes along with running a fiscal sponsorship program. So it really depends on what the unique situation is, and I'd be happy to chat with you, maybe tomorrow or later on this week about what you're looking for, and if that's something that I can make a recommendation for a place to go to look for that.
That's great. And Diane, the folks should email support@fracturedatlas.org. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
And I actually just wanted to mention and say thank you to everybody for participating tonight. And I don't know if there's any more questions right now, but before I continue on them, I just want to also mention that I'm out of the office tomorrow for professional training day. So if you email support, I might not be the person that gets back to you, but our staff is great, and they'll definitely be in touch or let you know that I'll be in touch on Wednesday.
Great. So we have about a handful of questions left. And Bregan wants to know, can you apply for a fiscal sponsorship as a group of people that is not specifically defined? For example, our group changes with each show we put on, and it's run by a group of 5 or 6 people without a defined business structure.
Yes, that is possible. The one thing to keep in mind is that, depending on the fiscal sponsor's structure, so for example, Fractured Atlas's fiscal sponsorship agreement is a grantor-grantee relationship. And so what that means is all of the money that comes to Fractured Atlas is from the donors. It's donated to Fractured Atlas for the purposes of your project. When we release that money to your project, it's technically considered a grant from Fractured Atlas. So that's the contract that you enter into with Fractured Atlas, the grantor-grantee contract. At the time we release the money, it's considered a grant, and grants are taxable income under the IRS tax code. So if you're an informal group that is coming to Fractured Atlas for fiscal sponsorship, there needs to be a legal recipient of that grant income that's coming from us. That can be an individual that's going to manage all of the financials for that group, or it can be an informal group with an employee identification number. But there typically has to be one person that is going to do all of the reporting requirements as far as that income on their taxes. Technically, since the money is only released to you for expenses related to your work, you should be able to offset all of that income you receive as the taxable income on your taxes, so you don't end up owing anything to the IRS. But each fiscal sponsor is different. So again, if you wanted to talk to somebody about what that means and how you can do it, you'll need to talk to each sponsor directly.
Mm-hmm. Right, and for the record, I see Bregan's follow-up comment is that the 5 or 6 people involved are always the same people, and they do consider themselves a collective, so it sounds like it would work just fine. Right?
Yeah, and I usually just recommend in that situation to just choose one person that's going to be sort of the financial head of the organization or the group, so that that person is responsible for receiving that income, but also for paying the bills and having all of those receipts and stuff. So at the end of the year, it makes it so you don't have to go around collecting everything from all the other members. That one person is the responsible party.
Mm-hmm. And Connie's asking if there are fiscal sponsors open to funding more than one project at a time. I'm assuming that if Connie, for example, has 2 different projects, is that a possibility? That's how I'm reading this question.
Right. It's for Fractured Atlas, we allow 1 project per membership. So, if you're a member of Fractured Atlas, you can only have 1 project, but you're welcome to have a second membership with a second project. In those situations, what we typically ask is that you think about, if you're an individual artist and you have, let's say you have 1 project that you're going to be working on that's a series of photographs, about a specific topic. Let's just say it's about water, and you're going to be documenting water for environmental purposes, and this is this one body of work that you have, and that's one of your projects. And then you say, but I also have another video project that I'm working on that's, something pretty separate, and it has, a different topic. But, these two projects, you could probably create one fiscally sponsored project that could cover both of them. So, if I was having those two projects, I would create a fiscally sponsored project called Diane DiBasella Projects, and I would write my project description to be something very broad that would encompass any sort of, project-based activities within photography and video work, and describe sort of what you're trying to capture within each of those without being project-specific. So you can be broad, and it's almost like you would be writing a mission statement for Diane DiBasella Projects, which, isn't a formal organization, but it's the idea that you're running a business as an individual, and what is the mission of that business. And that's what you would use as your project description.
Great.
I hope that helps.
I think so. I think that's great advice. I just want two quick kind of short announcements. One is I just wanted to do a thank you to the James Irvine Foundation for sponsoring this webinar and all of our Funding for Arts Month programs. And I also wanted to let folks know that this webinar was recorded, and we will be posting it to our grantspace.org, our multimedia archive. So you can send your colleagues, your fellow artists, friends, or members of your collective to our website. Give us a few weeks to post it, but everyone will be able to access this presentation virtually as a recording and be able to listen to the Q&A as well. So I hope that's helpful for folks. Another question here, there's just a few, and we do have to wrap up soon. Does Fractured Atlas have specific resources or tools to find appropriate grants? And I think we could answer that question, but I want Diane to take a stab as well.
Well, what I would say is that we don't have any sort of we don't have our own internal databases or search engines for finding grants. But what we typically recommend to people is to use the Foundation Center. It's one of the most complete databases of grant information in the United States, and it's the place to go if you're looking to search for a grant. So, while we have information about grants, and if you had a grant that you found and you wanted to chat about, we could help. But when you're really trying to whittle it down and figure out which ones are the right ones, the Foundation Center is the place to go. And Sarah Jo, I don't know if you want to piggyback on that and say anything additional.
Sure, absolutely. And I was going to respond as well that the Foundation Center can help you with that, and you can actually check out at grantspace.org/multimedia, and you can actually look at under the Finding Funders skill area and find a whole lot of different questions and answers on that topic, or databases or different classes on how to seek grants as an individual artist, or as a a fiscally sponsored project or nonprofit organization. So we can definitely help you with that. And we're whittling down here to some of our questions. Vincent's asking that he's aware that some fiscal sponsors offer marketing materials such as mailing lists, etc. Does Fractured Atlas offer such a service?
We do not have any external marketing services within our program. It's something that, if you're asking for like a list of people to solicit or to attend your shows, we don't offer any of those types of services in-house, unfortunately.
Okay, that is all the questions that I have from our listeners. I'm wondering if you have any last final thoughts that you'd like to wrap up with, Diane?
I just want to thank everybody again for participating in the webinar, and thanks for all of the great questions. Mm-hmm. I also just wanted to add that Fractured Atlas also offers webinars online on our website that are specific to fiscal sponsorship. So you probably don't need to take the one that is what is fiscal sponsorship, but we do have some that are more focused on how to raise money from individuals, how to use crowdfunding platforms, how to apply for grants, things like that. So if you're interested in checking those out, go to our website and click on the fiscal sponsorship section, and we offer them weekly. So I'm doing one tomorrow night on individual donations, and it's the type of thing that they're free and open to the public. You don't have to be a member of Fractured Atlas to access them.
That is great information, actually. We get that question a lot. in our library in San Francisco. So now I know where to send folks as well.
Awesome.
So thanks everyone for tuning in and stopping by and joining us today. Really appreciate it. And if you want to sign up for more webinars or trainings, you can always visit grantspace.org. Thanks everyone. Enjoy your evening. Bye-bye.
Thanks everyone. Good night.